Hey there, ConVEx crowd. How's everybody doing? My name is Keith Schengili-Roberts, and I, along with Josh Anderson, are going to be talking about why DITA isn't for everyone and the reasons behind it. We will be talking about essentially what DITA it seems to be best suited for from a business environment, and also looking at some of the detractors of DITA, and and also like some of the reasons behind the possible problems of future implementations, and how we can best overcome that within the DITA community. So without further ado, here is the agenda. Basically, we're going to do some introductions, followed by talking about the actual business side of DITA, why businesses are implementing DITA and utilizing it effectively, and for what ends. And also talking about DITA and its discontents, and then followed, of course, by Q&A session. At this point, you're probably wondering who the heck I am. My name is Keith Schengili-Roberts, and I am the Senior Content Strategist at Precision Content. I'm also a member of the OASIS DITA Technical Committee, chair of the DITA Adoption Committee, and I also am a professor at the University of Toronto teaching information architecture. Some of you may also know me as the writer behind the DITAWriter.com website. And if you want to contact me by email, there's my email. It's keith@precisioncontent.com. And you can see there I also have a little badge for 2017 Content Strategist Top 200. Back then, there may not have been a whole lot more than 200 content strategists, but apparently I was one of them. So that's good. And I'll pass it over to Josh to introduce himself.
I am that guy. I am Josh Anderson, Associate Information Architect at Precision Content. I recently earned a Master of Information degree from the University of Toronto, where I had Keith teach me information architecture. I've been a speaker at World IA Day events in Okinawa, Japan, as well as here in Toronto. I'm a new member of the DITA Adoption Committee. And if you would like to get in contact with me, you can find me at josh@precisioncontent.com.
And very briefly, I'll talk a little bit now about DITAWriter.com in case you're not already familiar with it. It's an industry blog I started over 10 years ago that has just shy of 400,000 views. And I don't consider that too bad for what is basically a niche website on a niche topic. There is fairly regularly updated information on things like upcoming DITA conferences, books on DITA, companies using DITA, DITA CCMSs, DITA editors, and other new tools and things like that. I also try to have interviews with those who are making a difference in the world of DITA. Now a little bit more about our company. At Precision Content, we understand that information is the lifeblood of every modern organization, and yet most silently struggle with antiquated processes and technology to create and manage that information. You need information that's easier for everyone to use so that the right information flows freely throughout the organization to anyone at any time and anywhere it is needed. We believe that everyone should have the right information to make the best use of your products and services. We understand that poor content has a negative impact on your business, which is why we help companies like yours traverse digital transformation through better content, technology, and processes. Learn for yourself why we were named one of the top 100 companies that matter the most in digital content back in 2019. I think possibly after that as well. Now, back to the subject at hand, I do want to say that what Josh and I are going to be talking about, is evidence-based. So we're going to be talking a lot about the future of DITA and technical communications in general. And again, I just want to emphasize that our conclusions and our opinions are based on evidence and not anecdotes. So Josh and I hope to do with this presentation, sorry about that, is
no
to
worries.
survey what we currently know and highlight some real industry trends. That's not to say that what we predict will necessarily come true, despite the evidence. If the past couple of years have demonstrated nothing else, it's how unpredictable things can truly be. In terms of explaining the title for this talk, and I definitely think that it is not for every organization or company that could conceivably use it. And I'll be talking about some of the business factors that appear to be necessary in order for DITA to thrive. Josh will also be examining what I think could be called DITA and its discontents, looking at the darts that have largely unfairly been thrown at DITA over the years. And I want to say, DITA is ultimately a niche market, and Josh will highlight that later. But boy, what a niche! Another thing I want to talk about, and again, mentioning the evidence-based approach to things, is that we have recently co-published the 2020 DITA satisfaction report, and a fair amount of the data used in this presentation comes from this publication, and it is available for free from the Precision Content website at the URL that's referenced there. Basically, if you look up DITA satisfaction and Precision Content, you will definitely find the page for that report. Okay. Now let's talk about the business of DITA. So a lot of presentations are going to talk, necessarily about how content creators are going to be using and working with DITA. This is not one of those presentations. I mean, while Josh and I certainly are steeped in DITA and can work and write with DITA, that's not the focus of this presentation. We're going to be looking much more at the business reasons and why firms and organizations are, actively using DITA and the decisions that they make to choose to adopt DITA and to make the best use of it. So in terms of who is using DITA, what you see here is the latest information I have on the number of firms known to be using DITA, which at this point is 757 different firms, and then this pie chart essentially assembles the various company types that are being used. So DITA started in the software sector and is still the single largest group of DITA users at over 26% of the firms that I've been able to track. It's worth noting that many of the other industries mentioned here are also using DITA when documenting their own software. So, for example, firms say in the financial services sector, for machinery, for hospital and healthcare and so forth, that may be in fact like the software portions of their business that are doing that. So I don't want to seem like it's software in one area and then not software elsewhere. Quite often it is software, in many other different touch points. Despite that, DITA use is, as you can see, fairly widespread and appears to be growing. The other slice that you see there, and in particular, keeps growing whenever I keep adding firms to this. These are, essentially categories of companies that fall under the 1%. So it would just be like too many thin slices. So they get bunched into this one large slice. But it really does, I think, emphasize widespread deployment of the DITA standard. And I want to add that I think the number of companies using DITA is considerably higher than what's depicted here. I've not had a lot of spare time of late to search for new firms that are using DITA. If you happen to be using DITA and your firm or organization is not listed on the companies using DITA on the DITAWriter website, please let me know. One of the things that is becoming apparent to me as I keep diving into this data and as I'm showing it to you here is that it really does appear that some of the chief advantages of using DITA come really to firms that can deploy it at scale. So here's another look at the same data from the previous slide, but now looking at the size of the firms in terms of the number of people they employ. And while there are a lot more slices to this pie, the bigger slices represent, on the average, the larger companies. Basically, it's all the material to say the left side of the pie. Now, if you then sort of collate this information together and look at the same information, but say have let's call a large firm essentially 500 plus employees, the same information shows that in fact it's mainly, not exclusively, but mainly large firms that are making the most of DITA. And again, I think what this is showing is that the types of efficiencies that DITA brings seem to work best at scale. And another view on things in terms of like how large is large, well, this data takes the firms described from the previous slides and then maps those companies against Hoover's financial database, looking at annual revenues that those companies produce. And what comes up is that more than 60% of firms that are using DITA have revenues in the $100 million and up per annum. So again, this emphasizes the fact that it is largely larger firm and implies that DITA appears to work best at scale. And again, I don't want to imply that it's only larger firms that can afford to do DITA. More like it's large firms appear to be able to make the most of the advantages that DITA can provide to them. Now, one point I want to emphasize is that I think DITA's primary superpower, so to speak, is really content reuse. This design decision made long ago to make DITA content reusable ended up being really the standard's chief superpower. None of the other major XML documentation standards like DocBook or S1000D emphasize this. Now, to be fair, DocBook has gone a little ways down that path, but DITA got there first and has been doing it longer. I'd argue that this has enabled the success of DITA from a business perspective. There are some other chief business strengths of DITA, and these are the reasons that I think most people attending this presentation will already be familiar with, such as, I've already talked about content reuse, but that goes hand in hand with, say, lower localization costs. Also, content format separation brings about process efficiencies. And also multi-channel publishing. The fact that you don't have to have multiple tools for publishing, you can just output and go to pretty much whatever format you actually need to meet the needs of your customer. Now, I want to do a brief focus here on the localization aspect of things. So the return on investment really makes sense, especially if you localize to many languages. And essentially, it comes down to the more languages, the better the return on investment. And arguably, it is those larger companies who have worldwide distribution that can get the most bang for their buck by using DITA and DITA within a localization toolchain. As an example of this, years ago when I was managing the localization budget for a semiconductor firm, the yearly maximum spend could well be in the $1 million US range. Though I have to say that cost was significantly reduced over time due to DITA and a CMS. But the point being is that for some smaller companies, $1 million might be their annual revenue, never mind what the budget they would want to spend on localization. Some of the less obvious benefits of DITA, in addition to all the things that DITA was designed for, when done right, it can also do the following: advanced product search engine optimization, provide a better customer experience, and the topic semantic structure works really well with emerging systems, such as chatbots and AIs, like intelligent document extraction platforms. This is by design, but not in the way that the founders of DITA would have originally thought. Single sourcing, content reuse, and more efficient localization are all great, but it's because of topic typing and the user focus of well-written DITA that we're seeing other opportunities opening up. Essentially, if the content is structured, it's that much easier for systems like chatbots and AI to extract accurate information that can then be provided to customers. Customer experience has also become increasingly a real business imperative. Here we are living at, one full year into COVID, and many of us are working from home or being asked to stay at home. And what are we doing? We are working and living as purchasing content and services online. And before the digital transformation, key business interactions with customers happened in the physical world. That's definitely much less the case today for fairly obvious reasons. But then our customers moved online, and we moved what had formerly been physical content online as well. Technical documentation, I would argue, has come more to the fore since it's often contains more targeted information that customers are looking for. So there were many key touch points users and customers would encounter back in, when content was more physical. Marketing might provide something like a data sheet detailing the features of a product. Sales would give additional supporting information, providing persuasive content enticing you to actually buy the product. Once the product was purchased, you would then get the fine manual that you would then hopefully read. And if there were then any issues post-purchase, you would contact support and services to help with your product. Since users could now choose the specific information they were looking for, it was much easier to completely skip parts of the customer experience which did not directly answer the types of questions users or customers were asking. Sales information often did not match what users were actually seeking, and users would not actually get to the phone call to support and services stage if other options were available to them first. So in this scenario, technical documentation has come more to the fore, since it more often contains information that prospective customers are actually seeking. Now, what I have here is that what you see here is Google's 4 user moments from a document they published back a few years ago. If you search for 4 user moments, you'll find it. It's well worth the look. In this case, I want to focus on the first and third moments. The first moment highlights that 65% of online consumers look up more information now than ever. And notice that the picture shows someone looking up their information on a smartphone. This experience is highlighted in the third moment, where Google finds that 91% of smartphone users turn to their phones while doing a task. Key thing here is that the majority of all searches have moved to mobile devices, and these 4 moments summarize the 4 most popular types of questions that people are making. This really confirms the fundamental shift of the traditional customer journey. And these 2 Google moments adapt well to the types of content technical communicators provide who are using DITA. And by the way, I want to say credit to Joe Perriman, who first noticed this relationship. So I'm borrowing this idea, but I do credit to him. So given all of this, is it any wonder that DITA-based technical documentation can then dominate search engine results? So there is an imperative to provide more customer-focused information, both from a marketing and technical documentation perspective. And partly by design and partly by accident, DITA is being recognized as pivotal in this. And this is where, upcoming technologies or present technologies such as chatbots and artificial intelligence really come to the fore. This subject has been getting a lot of interest in marketing and technical documentation fields these days. And I would argue that we're still very much in the early days, but it's likely to become another facet in the overall customer journey. And one other thing that I found was rather interesting that came out of the most recent DITA satisfaction survey is that on the whole, those people who are using DITA to produce content are a happy bunch, so it seems. This was a key difference between the last DITA satisfaction survey done in 2017. This was one of the biggest changes. Basically more than 3/4 of those asked responded that they were satisfied with their current DITA implementation. Interestingly, of those who expressed dissatisfaction with their DITA implementation, almost half of those did not have a DITA expert to help them along the path. So, those who are in the dissatisfied slice, seem to represent those who basically did not seek any sort of outside advice or get in somebody who already had experience with DITA to help with the implementation. So that, I think, does speak to the fact that it really does help to have somebody with the requisite knowledge to help with effective change management. So overall, I'd say teams guided by an external expert report fewer complications and higher satisfaction rates. And at this point, I'm going to move things over to Josh, and he can talk about DITA and its discontents.
Thank you, Keith.
Josh.
Yes. So our last slide was talking about how DITA users are generally pretty happy, which is true, but things are not as clear-cut as we're suggesting. So we don't want to imply that the future will be a bed of roses for DITA. There is serious content with DITA out there, despite the benefits. So let's talk about the people who choose not to use DITA. First, we have to realize that adopting DITA implies that you're going to adopt other practices at your organization. DITA isn't something that works just like an easy on and off switch. You'll also have to structure your content. And that's why you can see the pictures of the blocks here. Those are there for a reason. Structuring your content means that you'll have to identify the elements or the blocks in your content, give them a name, figure out a way that they can conform to the DITA model, or come up with your own custom information model that will work with them. And this is definitely no small task. If it appears that a DITA approach entails more time or money upfront than a less structured approach, it's because it does. And perhaps this is why we don't see smaller firms who would presumably have fewer resources to spare adopting DITA in large numbers. But if you zoom out your time horizons a bit, you'll see that the benefits, namely the ability to better reuse content across contexts, are worth that initial upfront investment of time and money. Now, for the next few slides, we'll share with you some results from the 2020 DITA satisfaction report that Keith mentioned earlier. And these identify the obstacles, challenges, and pain points that have fomented discontent with DITA. And as mentioned earlier, there is a significant amount of discontent with DITA out there. 83% of our survey respondents encountered some obstacles to their DITA adoption. And interestingly, these issues appear mostly to be around not the DITA architecture itself, so much as what I would say are the prerequisites to adopting it, which is namely to have a coherent content strategy as the bedrock. Val Swisher from Content Rules put it really well when she said that, quote, most of the obstacles to DITA adoption can be avoided or mitigated by a well-designed, fully documented content strategy. And by the way, Val identifies the core components of such a strategy in the survey report itself, if you're interested in learning more about what a well-designed, coherent content strategy looks like. And perhaps this suggests that the most important DITA jobs are really the content strategist roles, which might not even show up in searches on job sites for the keyword DITA. The second most cited obstacle to DITA adoption is the cost. And this is undoubtedly a particularly prevalent obstacle now during the COVID-19 pandemic, where budgets are tight and timelines are disrupted. This echoes what Dawn Stevens from CIDM said in her interview with Keith on his website, DITAWriter.com. Some companies are postponing initiatives like transitioning to DITA because of COVID-19. However, DITA doesn't need to be expensive, although the time and resources needed to establish a coherent content strategy might be great depending on the organization. There's a paper from Paris Diderot University entitled DITA, a Universal Solution, that expands on the cost of DITA, and they say, quote, financially speaking, DITA remains relatively affordable for larger or smaller companies, as long as they're not looking into specialization and provided that the implementation plan is complete and fully backed by management. Now, so far we've talked about obstacles to adopting DITA, but this slide shows us some of the problems that people have with DITA itself. And the number one issue is the training of technical communication team members. DITA does likely entail training writers with new tools, such as an XML editor like Oxygen, but it also requires a change in mindset for how authors approach writing projects. So for example, the primary unit is a topic rather than a page. There's a finite set of information types, and all topics must fit into one of those types. And this can certainly be a challenging paradigm shift. The number two issue is the ability to effectively, or I should say the inability to effectively repurpose and reuse content. And this definitely relates to the number one issue with DITA adoption, which was the lack of a coherent content strategy. I'm intrigued by the other issues reported since they relate to publishing, and to me, they suggest a need for better tools for DITA users. I know our company, Precision Content, is working on tools for easy ways to convert DITA documents to Word, PDF, or other outputs. But this is certainly an area of opportunity for other companies who want to create new DITA products as well. In this table of commonly reported DITA management challenges, we once again see content strategy brought up as a pain point. And in some sense, I would say it's a relief to see it here under management challenges, because content strategy certainly needs to involve company management rather than be, say, left siloed to a documentation department. A robust content strategy can and should have cross-departmental implications. The second most common challenge identified here is an inability to accurately measure content performance, which almost certainly relates again to the wider content strategy issue. So there's a number of ways that one could measure DITA content performance, such as time and the related costs saved on creating superfluous documentation once reuse strategies are in place, or lowered reading levels and thus better usability. That would result from the practice of breaking content into straightforward topic-oriented chunks. But these are KPIs that will need to be picked when the wider content strategy is put into place. There's a few issues here that relate to hiring and training. And let's not forget that people make up half of the components to an effective content strategy. If we think of Brain Traffic's famous content strategy quad, about half of our survey respondents cited people issues. And in one sense, maybe this can be taken as a sign of encouragement by those who are experienced in DITA that their skills are valuable on the job market. Rob Hanna, who is our boss at Precision Content, points out that management issues are most likely to form the root cause of all other issues identified in the survey. Rob wrote a blog about the 2017 edition of the DITA Satisfaction Report, and he said that organizations that see DITA as a magical fast path to the bleeding edge of technology or a panacea for multi-channel publishing are most likely to fail. It's those organizations that understand the importance of planning, experimentation, and governance who are the most likely to experience success. And he also made this important point. If you don't have the ability to affect headcount or reassign staff, then you will find yourself seriously hampered in the early stages of your DITA deployment. Finally, we have this table, which shows us the reasons given for potentially abandoning DITA. The most commonly cited reason is that the software used with DITA is inadequate. Now, DITA is vendor neutral and software neutral, which opens up the possibility that someone will be able to develop software that works well with DITA, even if it wasn't designed with DITA use in mind. XML editors are ready to be disrupted, so entrepreneurs can take note of that. The wording of the second most common response is interesting, I thought. Attractiveness of alternatives that appear easier to adopt. I wonder if they're actually easier to adopt. And we'll mention some of those alternatives soon. They may be easier in some sense, but the trade-off is that they lack the extensive functionality of DITA, especially around content reuse. There's also the issue of distrust of software vendors. And I found this sentiment echoed in a 2015 post from technical writing blogger Tom Johnson. His post was called 10 Reasons for Moving Away from DITA. And among his 10 reasons, he wrote that innovation with DITA is too reliant on vendors and that open source DITA solutions develop too slowly. So with all these issues in mind, what other options are available for organizations? Giving structure to unstructured content is widely recognized as an opportunity for businesses, especially given the notion that roughly 80% or more of all enterprise data is still unstructured. And DITA is only one way of structuring that content, so are other ways of structuring content better? Well, the path is not so clear-cut. A lot of this supposedly unstructured content actually already has a fair deal of structure baked in, especially when you consider that the most popular authoring tool is Microsoft Word, and that MS Office applications have been using their own form of XML since at least 2003. By the same token, image and video content come with a substantial amount of metadata, telling people as well as machines when, where, and who created those files. So all this might lead people to conclude that they don't need the structure provided by DITA because there's often already some degree of inherent structure there, even if it isn't necessarily what content strategists would look for, which is separation of content from formatting and presentation. There's also the fact that artificial intelligence is being directed toward parsing and understanding unstructured content. We know that IBM says that AI is the key to making unstructured data useful, and other tech giants such as Microsoft, Google, and Amazon fully agree with that. But I would say that far from rendering information architectures such as DITA irrelevant, it's really these types of structures that will facilitate the work of AI. Dawn Stevens says in her DITAWriter.com interview with Keith that she believes, quote, the long-term future of DITA lies in its ability to show its applicability as a source for artificial intelligence. DITA provides the semantic clues for AI systems to know what they're looking at. But as we know, DITA is but one of many ways to structure technical documentation. It's worth monitoring its popularity alongside its competitors, which is what Keith has been doing with his ongoing collection of technical writer job posting data. This chart on screen now shows that technical writer job postings on the popular site Indeed.com seek madcap flair and DITA experience at roughly comparable rates. Markdown, which is another alternative to DITA, has seen a marked rise in interest from June 2016 to the present, although DITA does still hold that top spot. So what might account for this shift away from DITA and toward Markdown? Well, one reason is that subject matter experts are increasingly producing upstream content. Programmers like Markdown. And when it's up to them to provide much of the content for API documentation, they're going to pick that over DITA. Additionally, the advent of agile documentation processes in small software development teams means that in some circumstances, subject matter experts, rather than technical writers, are going to be the ones who are writing content. The other reason is that the role of technical writer is changing. And what we mean by this are the job titles that don't have technical writer or writer in them. It's evident that there are three main positions associated with DITA job titles that are not technical writers. There's managers, those who assist with the publication process, and those who are structuring content or providing some additional value to the output process. And I would say because of the different skill sets and backgrounds of these positions, they might not be trained in or even familiar with DITA. And as a result, they may write their documentation differently than somebody would if they were trained as a technical writer. Some of the decline in DITA's hegemony can probably be attributed to the fact that there's just simply fewer technical writers being hired. Since late 2012, Keith has been checking the details for tech writer job postings on Indeed, and over the past 8 years, there's been an overall decline in the number of technical writer job postings there. Roughly 1,000 fewer job postings across the US than from its peak in fall of 2015. Possibly due to the interest in the developing new standard and the updated software tools that soon followed it, there was a peak in DITA-related job postings around the time of the release of the DITA 1.3 standard. Now, it might be a coincidence, but what is certain is that there's been a steady decline in technical writer job postings seeking DITA experience since then. But with this historical precedent in mind, I would say it's not too out there to assume that interest in and adoption of DITA will pick back up when the DITA 2.0 standard is released. And in the meantime, we have lightweight DITA. So this is an alternative to DITA 1.3 that may satisfy the needs of some organizations, particularly those who feel that DITA is overly complex. Lightweight DITA uses fewer elements, a simplified schema for structuring content, tighter content models, and a simplified specialization architecture. Additionally, there are three authoring formats for lightweight DITA. We have XDITA, which is based on XML, HDITA, based on HTML5, and MDITA, which is based on Markdown, specifically the GitHub style of Markdown. It's important to note that lightweight DITA is not being developed as a replacement for DITA. And actually, its target audience includes those who do not currently use any form of DITA at all. Dawn Stevens agrees that lightweight DITA is one of the most important developments in DITA's future. The fact that it draws from simpler, more familiar markup should ease the learning curve of DITA that many of the survey respondents identified as a pain point. So where is DITA on the technology adoption lifecycle? We estimate that it's currently in the middle of that bell curve. In the various sectors that Keith has explored in depth, including semiconductors, medical devices, and software, DITA usage is significant, but it definitely hasn't saturated those markets. DITA tool producers are very likely to have many more years of profitability ahead of them. So we would say DITA is here to stay, but that doesn't mean that DITA can stay complacent. It's in the phase of its life cycle that merely promoting its benefits is no longer enough. DITA must also be defended against competing standards. And those competitors might be able to claim an easier learning curve, but DITA still remains king when it comes to enabling omni-channel content reuse. Despite the presence of competitors, DITA remains a great choice for the sizable number of organizations who have yet to move to any form of structured content. So DITA's here to stay, but DITA must also evolve to meet the unaddressed challenges and needs of its users. And I think it will evolve to meet those needs. Recent meetings of the OASIS DITA Adoption Committee have included discussions about a shift towards advocacy over adoption. And the goal in that would be to provide the fundamentals on how and why structured content is worthwhile, which is a struggle for many technical communication teams. Our company, Precision Content, is actively developing new tools that will help organizations better leverage their DITA content by making it easier to publish DITA documents in a variety of formats, such as PDF and Word. Precision Content also has its own version of DITA that includes writing standards. So that way authors can know what they need to put in between the tags in order to best enable content reuse. Lightweight DITA presents alternative authoring formats that will be more familiar to content creators and should thus ease the learning curve. And last but not least, DITA 2.0 is on the horizon. So undoubtedly, there are challenges around adopting and using DITA as it exists today, but luckily, evolution is an inherent part of the DITA paradigm. Let's not forget that the D stands for Darwin. So with that, we'd love to hear your feedback and questions, and thank you so much for listening.
Indeed. Thank you very much for attending our presentation today.